how we deal with the issue of brand safety. We've all touched on it at different points. We've talked about ad blocking. It's obviously beginning to cause a headache. It's beginning to change things around. Sammy, you kind of mentioned how potentially it's the content that we're actually producing is not what people want to see, so that's ad blocking. How do we deal as an industry going forward with ad blocking, the issues around viewability, attribution? How do we deal with that?
So in terms of brand safety, I think it's important to work with a third party to make sure your ads aren't appearing against any brand detrimental content. And I think actually brand safety, out of brand safety, viewability and fraud is probably the most mature market in terms of the tools that we have to be able to deliver that. In terms of viewability, there's a number of challenges that I see in that there are quite a few partners out there that you can use to measure viewability, and the challenge is that at the moment they don't necessarily all have the same methodology. So the challenge that we have is that if you use a number of different partners, or you're looking to use a partner, which one has the best methodology and which one should we actually be using? And I find that one of our biggest challenges. In terms of viewability as well, 50% for 1 second for display I don't think is enough for TUI as a brand, or potentially any brand. I think we have to make quite an emotional connection with the consumer. A holiday is a very big ticket item. So I think understanding as an advertiser what your metrics should be is quite important in terms of viewability, and only buying impressions that'll actually work for you as a brand. And then in terms of fraud, I also think it's really important to work with a third party again to make sure that you're not buying any fraudulent impressions. And then lastly, on ad blocking, ad blocking is a growing concern, and I think the way that we're responding to that is just doing a general due diligence piece in terms of understanding what our frequency capping is with partners and making sure that we're not over serving ads to consumers and not annoying them. Making sure that we're actually excluding customers that have already converted is really important for us. And then additionally making sure that we're not paying for impressions that have been blocked. And also I think it's important for us to start investing more in dynamic creative, investing more in native, and making our ads more relevant to try and counteract the amount of people that are starting to download ad blockers and make them want to actually engage with our adverts that we're sending across.
It's a small list. I hope everyone's got that. Sammy will be around for 5 minutes afterwards if you wish her to repeat
and then I was like, kept
It's
going.
good. It's very good. It's very good indeed. Jenny, how long is your list?
You have asked kind of 4 questions in one.
Exactly.
What do we do about common?
You like to end on a bang.
I mean, I completely agree with Sammy. It's you work with third party partners who are specialists in issues like ad fraud and viewability. I think some of it comes down to setting the parameters right with the publishers. So you use the example about the IAB definition of viewable ads, and then you look at people like Facebook who believe that 3 seconds of an ad without the sound on is the same as a TV ad being delivered. So you do get into negotiations with media owners on that part, but effectively you are reliant on third-party companies. There's some very good third-party companies out there that deal with these issues and are absolutely specialist in what they do. I think for me the really interesting thing is about ad blocking, because I think effectively ad blocking is a challenge, but I think it's almost a challenge that we've created for ourselves as an industry. So I think poorly executed creative work. I think things like poorly executed retargeting campaigns that haven't been frequency capped. I think poorly executed native in a lot of ways. I think things like that, and also some of the publishers who've kind of basically signed up to every single piece of ad tech possible, so that the loading speed becomes ridiculous. I think all of these things have contributed to why people are so keen to block advertising. And I think I don't know what the solution is, but I always think if you compare again to other media channels, effectively the remote control on the TV set is an ad blocker, because most of us watch ad blocking on catch up, etc. And yet, a huge percentage of commercial breaks are still viewed, and I think that's because the production values that go into making TV ads, the production, the quality of what's actually in the break is making the ad break reasonably viewable. And I think ad blocking. I'm actually staggered by the number of people who have downloaded an ad blocker, because I think it's much higher than most people would have predicted, So I think it's interesting. I think it's an area to watch, and I think again, through proper multimedia planning and buying, you get around these issues. So you start to understand who are these people that really don't watch our, blocked our ads online, and how else can we reach them is the solution to it.
I deliberately haven't looked up at the back of the room because I know that Berrett is going to be cringing right now because you've raised the viewability fraud question, and he's going to get his soapbox out and she's going to want to pull it out from under me. So I'll try and keep it brief. As these guys have said already, the third-party we're exactly the same. We work with a bunch of third-party vendors for things like fraud and viewability. Fraud, I think, is probably the easiest one. It's relatively mature in terms of the solutions that are available. There are pre-bid optimization solutions against it. Some technology vendors offer a fraud-free guarantee. I couldn't possibly mention who they are, but that's one that's perfectly addressable if you've got the right tech partners and the right third-party providers to give you the solution. Viewability is a bugbear of mine because viewability is still to this day probably one of the most misunderstood issues of the industry, and we do love to jump on a bandwagon as an industry. It's better than it was, but I completely agree with Sammy. I know we've both had discussions over at the IAB over many months about this over a long period of time with the guys, that the viewability vendors all had wildly differing results when run against the same campaigns because of this differing methodology and differing chronology of what they're measuring and the order in which they're measuring it. So from a technology provider's perspective, our job is to work for our clients. And if our client comes to us and says, hey, we want to deploy XYZ viewability vendor as a pre-bid solution, our job is to go, okay, no problem, and flick the switch and buy media based on what that vendor is telling us is or isn't viewable. The concern is that when you're dealing in tens of millions of dollars, and we have no way of knowing whether vendor A, B, C, D or E is giving us the best read on what's viewable and what's not, given the significant variance between those results, that's a worry, because there's a lot of money that's potentially still being spent in the wrong places. Brand safety, again, I would say is a relatively mature solution. Now it's been around since the beginning. There's a big misconception about the type of inventory. I think when it wasn't programmatic, when it was merely a real-time bidding infrastructure, it was the remnant inventory. It was the stuff people couldn't sell that got thrown into the hopper. The vast majority of the inventory that we as a platform buy, and I know our other vendors in our industry buy, is premium inventory now. It's private marketplace inventory, it's publisher direct inventory, it's just being decisioned on in a programmatic sense. So I think the mechanics that are in place to provide differing levels of brand safety as appropriate for any given particular advertiser are kind of fairly well established. The ad blocking thing is a thing that I'm going to kind of raise my hand and go, do you know what? Don't know how that's going to pan out. Got to be honest. You can sit on one side of the fence and say, well, the internet's not free. Costs a bunch of money. To produce content, to have these sites up there. And Joe Public is a bit naive to think that I don't have to swallow any advertising. I just want everything for free. It's not going to work like that. So am I going to have to start paying subscription to get into certain content again? The Sun famously has just come back out of that now and said, well, that doesn't work. We'll go back to free again. So, I'm not too sure. I agree with Jenny. I think we've created the problem ourselves. I think poor execution across a number of different factors in our industry has driven frustration amongst consumers to the point where they're taking these measures. I disagree slightly as much as we monitor it, as you might expect, quite closely as a DSP, with sort of visibility on 99.9% of the ecosystem every day. And so we're measuring impact of different trends like ad blockers. And at the moment, it is definitely cause for concern. It's not having a material impact on us from a commercial perspective at the moment. I think the interesting thing for us is it's those quality publishers where the vast majority of the money that's being spent through the platform is going. 65% of the revenue that drives through our platform is brand, interestingly, not performance. And the majority of it is coming from tier one publishers. So they're the ones I'm interested in. I'm interested to know how those publishers are going to choose to deal with it, because it's going to start to affect those guys probably before it affects the rest of us. So I don't know with ad blockers.
Okay. Well, Wonderful, guys. It's been a great conversation. I'm conscious that you guys have probably got some questions, but just a quick summary in terms of where we are. I think we're actually kind of agreed here as a panel that programmatic's in a good place. It's going to continue to grow. I think the important things are the education, the right talent that's put it together, making sure the creativity and programmatic are working well together. The collaboration, I quite like the idea of brands collaborating, it's quite exciting around programmatic. The agency still has a huge role to play in terms of making sure that the advertiser is educated and ahead of the game. The tech companies are there having a big role to play in this as well. So I think overall we're in a good space. 2016 sounds very exciting for the role of programmatic. But enough of me talking. Do you have any questions for this panel before they all head off into the rest of their days, I suppose, or if they're lucky enough to the IAA lunch this afternoon? Wow.
Well, I have a quick question on environment and private marketplaces. It's Ivor from Dentsu. What's your favourite marketplace out there? I quite like the fact that Pangea came out this year. So you had Reuters, the FT, CNN, The Economist coming together to create this beast, this global beast. Can you give us some insight on what you're using now and what's working well for you?
I know you're going to think he would say that, wouldn't he? But it's our job to not have a favourite private marketplace, or indeed any favourite inventory source. And I know, and I'm going to try not to sidestep the question. I'm going to try and give you a material answer. But in a similar way to how Jenny's operating from an agency perspective, and obviously you guys know this, as an agent for the client, what you're looking for is the most effective and efficient media source. When you start to be predictive about that source, prescriptive I should say about that source, hopefully when deals are done at an agency level, because we react on agency level deals, so we don't do the deals, we don't get commercially involved in them, it's between the advertiser and their agency and the publisher to strike those marketplace deals. We just execute them through the platform and apply the data decisioning to make better decisions about the inventory that the agency has negotiated on behalf of the advertiser. The interesting thing for us is that we see all of the open exchange, so Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and Rubicon and Pubmatic and all those other different things, and Videology and all the things, Xaxis, as inventory sources, as well as all the private marketplace and publisher direct deals. So one of the value pieces to the brand as us as a technology partner is being able to give them that kind of holistic view of the media landscape. When a deal is done on a private marketplace between a publisher, because we don't affect the economics of it, the publisher still gets paid whatever it is you agree to pay the publisher on behalf of the advertiser, and we try to make the media work as hard as possible by being intelligent about which impressions we serve, which creative executions to in which order, through which channels. The interesting part is whether or not those deals that are being done in the first place are the right deal for that advertiser. And one of the great things that helps the agency out is having this visibility across the wider ecosystem of inventory for you to be able to determine the suitability. There's a lot of, coming from the scale of agency group that you're coming from, there are a lot of media deals that are done. Like the deal has already been done. It's just a case of we have to find a way to utilise some of that inventory across all of our client portfolio. I think where the technology can probably help is to make more informed decisions on behalf of the agency as to which of your client portfolio a particular piece of inventory is most appropriate for at any given time, rather than kind of maybe forcing, I won't say the wrong media, but maybe not the most effective or efficient piece of media at that moment in time for that particular brand or that particular campaign. So I'm going to balance on the fence on it and say that it's not really our remit to get involved in it, other than to just try to make it work as hard as possible once you guys have figured out what you want to buy.
I think one of the most interesting things about private marketplaces, preferred deals, is being able to overlay publisher data as a kind of added value side of it. So I think publishers that have bespoke offerings in terms of different packages you can access, different data sets you can apply, is something that's really interesting for us. And additionally, publishers that we can work with on more bespoke formats is quite exciting as well.
We had another question just at the back there.
You mentioned the current need to understand attribution a lot more. Completely understand that it's just a growing solution that needs to be happening with regards to like the floor of last click and understanding how to monetize different partners. there's a load of different attribution companies out there. What current steps do you think are best practice to determine that, and do you have your eye on anyone in particular?
I won't mention any names, but I will say, in terms of how we've approached it, it was about understanding every single partner that we could potentially use that was out there, and understanding what their offering was, what the potential limitations were, etc. One of the biggest parts of the attribution thing for us as an advertiser is around education. So the internal educational piece is really huge for us, and just getting the rest of the business to understand why last click is not an efficient measurement model has kind of been our focus. And then just understanding, obviously, alongside that, who's going to be able to deliver that solution for us. I think one of the most important things about attribution, for me anyway, is that it has to sit independently. I don't think that it should sit with the partner that you're using, or it should sit with your agency. I think the advertiser should own that decision and own that data.
I think I agree. I mean, we have, we've got experience of working across a lot of the different attribution platforms, and increasingly that's becoming a challenge for us, because each advertiser will say, I've just, they'll kind of do their own deal with it with an attribution provider, and literally we then have to get our guys trained up so that they can, have a single view really with the client. So we've got kind of, we use a whole variety ourselves, and then we also have to increasingly get trained up on, whichever provider the advertisers use. And I think, the answer really is in the different methodologies and different algorithms. So effectively, your system's learning. So you're not there's not a kind of one blueprint that's the best for every single type of advertiser. So it's a challenge for agencies, because we have to have people who now understand all the different pieces of technology and how to piece it together and how to compare them. So for some of our smaller advertisers, we will have to make that recommendation and work with them. But for some of our bigger advertisers, they will have chosen their own technology, and we then have to, our challenge is then to get trained on it and make sure that we're having a single view, because otherwise if you've got two different methodologies giving you two different sets of results, then that just becomes a whole world of pain.
And then I think we have one last question on this side, James.
I do have a question, Rajiv from Vodafone. So I'm not a media maven, most of you are. I work in digital owned media, so websites, apps and things. So new to this space, got some competing technology partners helping outside Vodafone. So I sit in Vodafone Group, and I'm DataXu work with one or two of our markets. So I'm quite interested in this idea of transparency, because I don't see any transparency from an advertising standpoint in most of our markets in Europe. Not sure about Asia and other markets. So if I ask a simple question around the split between transparent deals as an advertiser, and I actually if you've been able to enforce transparency with FTE based or margin based, because the definition of an agency is the margin on what you're buying and then sort of on to your client. So are you suggesting that we are in a space where transparency is accepted and you are able to have 50% of the media units totally transparent? Or are you saying this is what you're aspiring to get to?
I think it's definitely changed over the last year, 2 years or so. I think before it was completely non-transparent, and I think as more and more advertisers have now pushed for transparency, I think that more agencies and partners have started to deliver that. And you can even see it with some partners specifically. In the past they were less transparent, and now you can see them being more transparent, because advertisers can get transparency, full transparency from some partners, and therefore I do see a shift in what partners are offering, because they can see that their competitors are offering complete transparency, and advertisers will no longer work with them because they can get it somewhere else. Although I'm saying that, it is still an aspiration, because there are still some elements of our media buying that are not as transparent, but that is our goal, to be completely transparent. I
think that one thing I'll add to that is I loved when you said, I'm going to ask a simple question about transparency, and I thought, there's no such thing. Transparency is not just about media cost, because media cost in isolation doesn't give you transparency, because it can be manipulated. So for you as an advertiser to be sure, you not only need to be able to understand the media costs and any other third-party costs for things like viewability partners or brand safety partners or any other add-on cost on there, but you also need to have visibility on the media itself. So you need to have impression level reporting on how many impressions from which publisher domains related to which level of performance. So how much am I buying from who, at what price, and which parts of that are driving performance, whether it be brand or whether it be DR type performance for me. You also need tactic transparency. So you need, as an advertiser, to know when you give somebody a bunch of money, are they just retargeting your audience to within an inch of its life to try and drive all the performance and not really worrying about prospecting to new audiences and bringing things in. So the mix of tactic in terms of how the budget is being spent across the various different tactics within the campaign is also important. And then there's kind of what we would classify as management transparency, which is a strategic level for the account. Let's be transparent about the media spread on a cross-channel basis. In terms of how we plan to deploy, and does that fit in with the brand's objective in terms of what they're trying to achieve in a given time. So I think very importantly for me, because people talk about transparency and understandably they automatically think about price, tell me if somebody's making more money on this than it's actually costing. But actually, to be able to work that very important question out, you have to have visibility and transparency on those other components as well, for you to feel comfortable that I've got a full picture here. I can see how much we're spending on what's of value to me, what's not, and how it's being used at a tactical and strategic level for me as an advertiser. And I think that's quite an important aspect of transparency.
And I think just to build on that slightly, so I think because programmatic is largely in the domain of the media agency, and the media agency has, 10 years ago was probably appointed on the basis of their ability to buy television or press or other media channels. The way in which media agencies get paid has to change in order to deliver that transparency. So, we, not all of our advertisers, but we always prefer advertisers to pay a fee based on the number of people. And then obviously our profit goes on top of that, the people cost, the fixed cost of the business, and then our profit. And that's always where our start point will be. And I think there needs to be an understanding that to do data properly, to do technology properly, it's no longer a media buying thing. So it's no longer a small percentage of, the person that's picking up the phone and spending millions of pounds in one go with ITV, for example. It's actually quite a labour intensive role. So I think part of the behaviour that's driven the lack of transparency among agencies has been, a failure on the agency's part to go and talk up front to advertisers about this is the change in team that you'll need, this is the extra resource you'll need, and this is the fee related to that extra resource. And I think the agencies have kind of relied on the old metric of a commission or a low fee based on a small number of people channeling through a lot of money with little data at the other end of it. And instead of having those upfront conversations with advertisers, they've decided to try and mark media up through the trading desk. So I think it's almost like that everyone needs to be quite open and honest about it. Programmatic it requires a different type of person in the agency. It requires greater resource per pound note spent, and that has to be remunerated if advertisers want a completely transparent solution. Does that help to answer your question? Have we confused you more now?
It was a very thorough answer. I think that was good. Well, thank you very much, guys. Just to say thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to Sammy, Jenny and Chris. I hope that was as informative as you wanted.